Good morning. Good Sunday morning. So, hope everyone's doing good. I know out on the West Coast here, we're getting torrential rains. It's pretty wild. It's been raining for like 3 or 4 days straight, and sometimes it's so heavy, it comes down in sheets. And it's interesting how this relates to the astrology. There's a lot of old documents that I have that actually talks about how Venus and other planets open the gates to moisture. And when you think about how much weight there is in a rainstorm, it's actually mind-boggling. Just, pick up a gallon of water sometime, or better yet, try 5 gallons. And you have millions and millions, probably billions of gallons that come down in rainstorms like this. And it's all floating up there. Pretty interesting stuff, isn't it? So when you look at creation itself, it's actually mind-blowing when you start to examine everything that's going on. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is Saturn is getting to a slow stop here, and it's about to go direct, which is really important. And it's interesting. For years, I've studied the mysteries of not only the phenomena of retrograde planets, but what do they mean? What do they mean to us in our birth chart? And how can we practically use this? And one of the things that I have to say is there's a magic to the interaction of consciousness with these planets. It's absolutely stunning. All the planets that are out from the Earth. And when I say out from the Earth, that means Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. They all go retrograde every single year, except Mars. Mars only goes retrograde once about every 2 years. But Jupiter out, they all go retrograde every year. And it's interesting because Jupiter goes retrograde just a little bit, about 4 months. It's not exact, but pretty close to 4 months. Saturn goes about 4.5 months retrograde every year. But here's what's mysterious about this. And people always say, well, do the planets really go backwards? Of course they don't. If you examine the solar system, it's quite interesting because you can see here, I just got a little model running, but as you page through the years, this never stops. This is a matrix of interactive energy that's modulating down to creation, all life on Earth. And what's interesting about this is many will tell you that the planets, of course, don't go retrograde at all. And some people say, well, it's an optical illusion. Well, actually, it's not an optical illusion. What it is, it's an Earth-based phenomena. When you think about it, we're sitting on Earth. We're not sitting on the sun. So if you look at a heliocentric model, which is all the planets going around the sun, nothing goes retrograde. Nothing goes backwards. But from the Earth, different story. Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year. Of course, it's retrograde right now. In fact, Mercury's going to go into the sun. We'll talk about that on this coming Wednesday, right on the new moon. This is very significant. And what's interesting is if you study astronomy and astrology, what you'll really come to the conclusion of very quickly is that nothing can ever happen all in the same totality way twice. It's actually a reality machine. And when you study electional astrology, which is the art of signing contracts, getting married, selling, buying real estate, I know I do it all the time. I just had a good friend and client call me yesterday, and he was selling some real estate. And I remember about 6 months ago, he goes, this thing's never going to sell. Jeff, what's going on? I said, just relax. I said, we put it up at a good time. It's going to sell. He sold it, and he sold it at the price that he wanted to. And I get so many reports back from people. And I also get people talking about, hey, I put this thing on the market and we just, we're not getting any offers or whatever. I had one lady, she was trying to sell a place for 3 years, couldn't get it going. I said, take it off the market when the contract expires, which it had. And I said, we'll give you a good time to put it on. Well, why am I bringing all this up? Because when planets are retrograde, see, the eastern horizon represents the buyer or the seller. The western horizon, at the moment in time you ink spot a contract, represents the buyer or seller. So if you don't have harmony between them, or they're about to go retrograde, that means you're going to get delays. You see, I just did an interrogation last night for someone, and their signifactor was stationing, which just happened to be Saturn, and going direct. Well, what does that mean in interrogation astrology? Very important. And this is where you take astronomy and you apply it to life on Earth. It's so amazing. And that was something that fascinated me back in the 80s when I got exposed to electional and interrogation. Of course, modern astrologers call it horary, which is a Latinized term that means the same thing. Indian astrologers call it prashna, one of the most formidable and absolutely mind-blowing types of astrology. Why? Because, I get this from clients sometimes. I'm casting a chart and they go, well, how did you know that? Well, it's because the planet that represents the person you asked about is doing a certain astronomical phenomena. And you go, well, wait a minute, how could consciousness be represented by the planets? Well, if you're asking a question at a certain point in time, they are. And what's interesting is everybody asks questions of all different natures. Where's my cat? Is my uncle going to be okay? Is my wife going to become my husband? Is my boss? You see, all these light up different houses in an astrological chart, which in plain English means areas of life. And when you look at the phenomena of each individual planet, it's absolutely mind-blowing. You can even see, like I get this all the time. Hey, you think this attorney will be good? You think this doctor will be good? Well, the Lord of the seventh, before you hire them, is the person in question. If they're in really good astrological condition. Now, there's a lot of complex rules to that. Are they stationing and going retrograde? Are they stationing and going direct? Are they in good dignity? Also, you can see if they're north or south of what they call the ecliptical latitude. And it's detailed stuff. You can even see if they know what they're doing by it's called planetary sect, of daytime planets in a daytime chart in a daytime placement. Pretty wild. And if they're not, they're probably not that competent. So there's so many things in the dashboard of ancient astrology to look at that actually shows the reflection of what you're asking about or the time at which you, again, commence an important act. I always tell the story. I got invited to a wedding. This is many years ago. And the person was an astrologer. And she said to me, oh, this is going to be great. We're getting married with Jupiter and Mercury in trine. And I didn't look at anything at the time, and I figured, okay, a month later, you go to the wedding, right? You sit there and everybody's, having the ceremony. And of course, the band's playing music. And I got looking at a chart and wait a minute, this is not going to work out because she didn't calculate that Mercury was stationing and going retrograde before the two aspects met. And about a month after they got married, the husband calls me up and says, I can't believe what's going on, Jeff. I said, well, what's going on? He says, well, she said she wants my stuff out of the house and we're getting a divorce. And she wanted everything gone by the time she came back from Europe. And I said, that's because you two, when you got married, Mercury was going retrograde. Now that just happened to be Mercury, but that can happen to any planet, which is interesting. So that brings me back to the subject of today, Saturn stationing and going direct. Now, here's what's even more mystical. If you take the time to study these things, you'll find the planets go forward and backwards every year, and they'll go over a certain degree, and then they'll come back and retrograde at another degree. And then when they go direct, they'll go back over it again. Like, for instance, Saturn actually goes direct this year on November 27th, so it's not today. But why I brought it up is because as we speak, Saturn's right now, I think at about 00 degrees, 28 seconds of speed in relationship to the Earth's position. That's really slow. Just to give you an idea, 1 degree, Mercury can fly around the moon moves at like 13 degrees per day, just to give you an idea, because it's all degrees and minutes. So it's heady stuff. But Saturn's just crawling right now. Just to give you an idea, in a week from now, it'll be so slow that it's literally almost stationing like in the sky. It's not moving from our perspective. And of course, on the 27th, it'll start to go direct, meaning in the same motion that the Earth is in. So it's like two cars on a road, one doing 55, the other one doing 45. Well, the one doing 45, which is much slower, it's going to look like it's going backwards if you're looking out the windows of your car. So this is how it acts. It's all a matter of perspective. just like reality. Depends on which news station you listen to, right? That's your reality. So that's the same thing. We all are in our reality machine here called the Earth. So it's interesting. And what does it mean to you? Well, depending on the house it's in, and also depending on the aspects it's making in your chart, this is huge. Every single person listening right now, including myself, I got Saturn in the eighth. What does that mean? Change, a change grenade, right? You're forced into changes that you necessarily don't have control of. And so everyone has Saturn somewhere in their chart in a certain house, and it's going to be making certain yogas and aspects to your birth chart, which is the resonance of you, right? Or at least the energies that you're experiencing right now. So what's interesting is whether it's positive or negative, you're going to feel these effects extremely powerful as the planet stations and goes direct. I'll never forget back in the late 80s, my mother had passed away and I had a Saturn return. It was unbelievable how intense it was. Saturn stationed right over my Saturn return and hung there for like almost a month. And it was brutal. The next Saturn return, boop, it went right by. You see, so this is where the details of interactive astrology to your birth chart is incredible. And it also works with elections. I've seen it, contract signed. If there's bad significations in there, you're going to have trouble. So it's quite amazing. And a lot of people say to me, well, why haven't you set my gem on time? And I said, well, because I'm waiting for a good astrological time, you see. So, and you lock that energy even into gemstone pieces, contracts, marriages, etc. Even trips. I've had people, hire me a lot of times for taking trips. We got to take an important business trip, or we're taking a pleasure trip. We want it to go good, right? I mean, anywhere you travel on this planet, you're going to spend thousands of dollars. You got plane flights, you got rent-a-cars, you got hotels, you're going to eat, and of course, you're going to do some fun things, right? So who wants it to go bad? Well, the Eastern horizon is the commencement of the journey. The 10th house is the trip there. The 7th is the destination in which you achieve. And the 4th house is the outcome at the time you grab the luggage and walk out the door. And I do this all the time, even surgery elections. And interestingly enough, the planets that are direct and retrograde and well dignified, signifying those angles, have a lot to do with what you experience. And it's very complex. You can have a good trip, right? But you might have a flat tire or whatever. So, there's a lot of details to it. And that is interrogation and electional astrology are the most advanced type of astrology. And I can tell you, almost 50 years of really detail, because I wasn't into electional and interrogation quite, it was in the 80s is when I got into it. You'll never figure it all out. It's like a all wise, all tricky oracle, and it's all down to the astronomy of what's happening. So back to the subject today, Saturn is stationing right in a very peculiar degree. And look at the world right now. I mean, I'm hearing reports from England. It's really dicey over there. Like there's so much stuff. People are being put in jail for posting things and saying things. There is so much crime in Europe right now in different places. I'm hearing the same thing in other parts of the world. The owners at the top of the pyramid really do want to create dissension right now. And we're seeing a lot of division here in the United States. And of course, follow the money, right? So that's another deep subject. And there's also corruption being exposed in Ukraine. Imagine that. We've heard about the corruption. Look at the Biden administration. Look at all the stuff that went on with all the money and Burisma and all these different things that happened in Ukraine. Well, more is coming out. Apparently, some people had just been exposed in some portions of government or energy systems over there in the government, and they're resigning. So there's so many hidden things that are going on. Well, with Saturn going direct, a lot of stuff starts getting exposed. And of course, everybody's all over the Epstein files, right? And that's going to be an interesting one too. But it relates to Saturn stationing and going direct. Now, here's what's interesting. I got invited to a documentary. You probably heard about it on the Fox News, but it's about disclosure. And we have generals, we have congressmen, senators, etc., all exposing, hey, we've been lied to for 100 years about UAP, UFOs, etc. And there's overwhelming evidence. And it's pretty cool because there's like a Q&A with the director and the producers afterwards. And I'm kind of looking forward to going to that because I know myself, I don't need a documentary or the government to come out and tell me that disclosure needs to happen. We have seen phenomena so amazing, most of us, anybody who's been around the UFO community. I know I've been actually hired to do studies on this kind of stuff, and it's pretty wild. And psychiatrists to generals have said this is not fake. So, and I don't think we've been lied to for 100 years. If you go back to Egypt, if you go back to so many different documentaries that have been done over the years, I don't think we've been alone ever. And this is stuff that has been really interestingly hidden. So what's most important here, we got helicopters flying by. I don't know if you can hear them. So has the war started yet? I hope not. But anyhow, the the bottom line is this is a very powerful time in the world. And why I'm bringing all this up is because we have Saturn going direct, and it's going to conjunct Neptune. When? In February. We'll be talking more about that. What does that mean? Well, reality dissolving. Saturn rules structures, and it rules things that are solid in our lives and karmas and all that stuff. But Neptune is the planet of illusion, confusion, delusion, and also spirituality. So the reality structures tend to melt a bit. Now, Saturn and Neptune come together about every 30-something years. This is not a unusual phenomena. What is an unusual phenomena is the degree that they're happening. They're happening in the very first Egyptian bound of Aries in the tropical systems. Now, we'll talk about the sidereal too. But this is significant because it hasn't happened like this in the very first tropical bound of Aries in probably close to 26,000 years or more. I haven't researched exactly when it happened last, but it's at least that long. And many astrologers have been talking about it. So this is a really rare occurrence. But as evolution shows, you can never get the astronomy to be in the same place twice. I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. This is truly the matrix. And, this is another interesting little diagram here. You can see the planets don't just orbit around the sun, even though I know a lot of people are flat earthers, but they actually do this phenomenon. Here, let me find the word. This is the right one here. They actually kind of rocket around the sun. Here, let me go back to the beginning of this. You can see here, that's the normal model, okay, of the solar system. But what they're really doing, you'll see here, they're spiraling around the sun. So, and what does that mean? Well, this is what astrologers look at. When I look at an interrogation, if I see a planet at very far north or south latitude, now that's also referred to as a fancy word called declination, that has an effect on how strong or weak that planet is. Why? Because the closer they are to the ecliptic, which is also known as the latitude of Earth, the stronger they are. The farther away they are, the weaker they get. You see, it's like light and sound. The closer you get, the farther you get. So there's all these astronomical phenomena that was used and observations in ancient astrology that you don't see in modern sun sign astrology. And again, I'm talking about people who were 1,000 to 2,000 plus years ago documenting this stuff in such a high degree of accuracy. And again, one of my favorite astrologers was Ibn Isra. And again, I say to the critics, here, I'll pull that little book over here. This is one of the books he wrote. It's called The Beginning of Wisdom, which is interesting because the beginning of wisdom he cites as interrogation, understanding that this is an interactive consciousness here. This book is phenomenal because he puts things into plain English. Like, for instance, if a planet is retrograde, the person is going backwards. They're not heading in the right direction. They're confused. Things aren't going their way. It's falling apart. If they're stationing and going direct, it's going to get better for them real soon, see? And you look at the aspects. So astrology is exceedingly complex. It is. It's not a simple thing. You're not going to pick it up and understand it in 2 seconds. This is why it's really good to have a professional analyze it. And the other thing is emotion. See, like when I get really emotional, I'm very careful about casting my own interrogations. Why? Because you may not be as objective as you need to be to analyze this stuff. It takes a lot of focus, takes a lot of coffee. And I'll tell you, you need to be on your toes when you do astrology. That's why it's a lot of mental work, but it's a lot of fun too, because you're really observing the phenomena of, you could say, the celestial influences, which there is a bunch of them and a lot of variables. You can never get the same thing twice. That happens when you look at a question or an election. Electional astrology is really detailed. You got a lot of factors to look at. I get a lot of folks say, well, hey, I can't wait. I got to sign this contract next Tuesday, right? And I'm always like, well, can you wait till Wednesday or the day after or whatever, if it's not good. And, sometimes we got to take what we get, and you can never get a perfect chart. I know I wish I had a spaceship. I'd go up there and move stuff around, but good luck on that one. So anyways, I just wanted to bring this up, that this is a phenomenal time, an amazing time of change, and I think growth, if we're up for it, with this Saturn going direct. And again, Saturn goes direct every year and goes retrograde every year. Like I said, the outer planets, particularly Jupiter, goes retrograde, just a little over right around 4 months. And Saturn's about 4.5. Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto go retrograde much longer. But interesting how every year they do that. And that's because of our orbital speed going around in relationship to their orbital speed, which is much slower. Pluto takes just short of 250 years to go around. And of course, that's what we just had on the United States the last 4 years. And it has seemed like Pluto return, hasn't it? No human being will live to see a Pluto return. And if anybody figures that one out, you better let me know what you're eating for breakfast, because I'm going to want some too. But 250 years is impossible for most human beings to live, even though we hear in the Bible, like Methuselah lived 900 and something years before the flood, right? It'd be nice to get back to that one. And we might actually, in a couple of thousand more years, I think we're going to see advances in so many sciences that, and I also think the life force energy as we move to the galactic center, which is believed to be right around 11,500 to 12,000 AD. And that's very, very possible that we'll see that. But anyhow, a lot of powerful stuff here going on. And I also wanted to mention too, that one of the things that is really powerful here is this new moon coming up. And we'll talk about that this Wednesday. It's, again, you can never get the same thing twice. And think about that. That's why our lives are never exactly the same twice, because the progressions and the transits, which are always unique, are happening to all of us. And that goes for the world too. When you look at nations and you look at the world at large, nothing ever is exactly repeated. Yes, we get cycles repeating, or like type cycles, but you'll never get the exact same thing. Just like right now, when you look at, I've been mentioning a lot that Uranus is again now direct, and it's going over the I forget now, is Uranus direct? I can't remember. But anyways, I can't keep it all in my head sometimes. Again, I'm only on my first cup of coffee. But I would tell you that it's really important. Yeah, Uranus is retrograde right now. So what's important is Uranus is going to go over, again, Alcyon this coming spring. And every time Uranus goes over the Pleiades, like I had mentioned, what do we get? Dissension in the world. You get wars, revolutions, crazy stuff. By the way, speaking of revolutions in Mexico, last night I just saw a video where they broke into the president of Mexico's palace, and there's a huge revolution going on down there because they're accusing her of being involved with the cartels and not accepting Trump's help and all that. See what I mean? This and we get this stuff going on all the time, but you're going to find it's much more pronounced between now and next spring. And with Saturn going direct and hitting Neptune, this is a cocktail for some really bizarre stuff to happen, massive changes in the world. And when you look at how this relates to you, because, I don't know about you guys, but I always say, hey, how's that relate to me, right? So you look at the aspects in your chart up against that. Now, many people are out there on, programs like Astrodeans, which are good. I don't want to badmouth them. They're certainly good. It'll give you a cursory look. But to really get into detail, you really got to examine it. And that's why when I do readings, I give people detailed analysis of the cycles they're in, which means Saturn in houses and Jupiter and all the other planets and the yogas and the doshas you're in, and how it interacts with you. And it's not simple. I wish it were, but life ain't simple, is it? And this kind of is I drew a parallel thinking about this when I was kind of researching for the podcast. I thought, wow, that's kind of how life is. The planets go retrograde a portion of the year, but yet the rest of the year they're direct. Isn't that kind of like life? Life's mostly positive, but then we get some stuff that really is challenging, So it's kind of like that. Life is always this push and pull between challenges and growth and challenges. We take a step forward, seems like something knocks us back. So that's just the nature of planet Earth. And it is the way it is. And I always, I love, that little cartoon. I always play that a lot, which is Mr. Wizard. Remember, that was the back in the late 50s, early 60s, is played. I love this little cartoon.
Dressel, 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 drone. Time for this one to come home.
And see, the wizard would send a little turtle into a worldly experience of life, right? He'd become a fireman, become a doctor, he'd get married, do whatever, and everything get all screwed up, and he'd scream, Mr. Wizard, Mr. Wizard, and then he would say, twizzle, twazzle, twizzle, dum, put him through the time tunnel and bring him back out. I'm not so sure that the incarnations here aren't something like that, but probably I think it's safe to say we have something in the middle, and that is, again, our minds, our lower conscious minds, are our best friends and our worst enemies. And that's why we step outside and try and grow in higher consciousness, because the myopic consciousness that we have in our lower conscious minds is what we take with us when we exit these bodies. They say the mother makes a garment for the soul in the womb. And that is where the soul experiences time and space and life, as we call it. And think about that. Even the seed of a plant, all you got to do, you can have a seed on the shelf for 50 years or longer and throw it in the ground, add some water. The soil becomes the womb that now creates the garment, which is the sheath that the plant experiences life in. Same thing with every animal, every living thing. It's pretty wild. This Earth is a reality machine. And when these planets go retrograde and direct, they have a huge effect on creation. And depending on what they do, it's really quite interesting. And I have to say, this one, in light of the Uranus retrograding back over the Pleiades and then hitting Alcyone and going direct again, is huge. It's absolutely huge, because what we find here is the amalgam of everything going on is really what it's all about. You can't just look at one thing. You can't just say, oh, Mercury's retrograde, or Saturn's going direct, or Jupiter now is retrograde. You see, and they never do it at exactly the same times. This is why, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. If you really examine this, especially if you study interrogation astrology, it's so accurate, it's creepy. The key is understanding it. It takes a lot of mental analysis to understand what the chart says. I've never seen an interrogation wrong. The only time I've seen it wrong is if I interpreted it wrong, or other astrologers have interpreted it wrong. That's why you have to really be on your toes. Here, let me show you something. This is really cool. Give you a little look-see over my shoulder here. So if I share the screen, this is kind of cool, because what you'll see here, let me see if I can share this doggone thing. So if I come in here, and I'll just show you, a lot of people say to me, well, geez, Jeff, what is all this stuff over here? Well, this, I know it looks like Swahili, but this is the speeds of the planets. This is their latitudes, north and south, declination. This is when they rise over the horizon. This is when they cumulate at noon. This is when they set at sunset. And this is where they are at midnight. You see, so this is deep stuff. And these are the geometric aspects that they make over here. Now, there's many different types of astrology programs. And see, this program, I kind of custom set it up, but it even tells me whether a planet is in what we call sect or not. And you might say, well, what does that mean? Well, that is, again, what I mentioned earlier. That's kind of very hard to see on this, but it tells me whether a planet is in its element. In other words, it's in a daytime chart, daytime planet, daytime segment. So it's detailed stuff. And again, I did not come up with this stuff at all. I can tell you who did. I think it was angelic or extraterrestrials, and probably both, communicating this to us. And again, this gets into the stuff that I mentioned earlier. The earth is a time machine, and it is. When you think about it, the reality structures that we're in every single day, and most of us don't think about this because we're too busy dealing with life, right? Every day is sunrise, every day is noon, and every day is sunset, and every day is midnight. I don't care if you're a flat, round earth or square earth, it doesn't matter. You are going to experience the sunrise, the sun cumulate, the sunset, and the sun go to midnight. And we are also going to experience the basic 27-day lunar aspects and all the aspects it makes. The moon literally makes an aspect to every single thing in your birth chart every single month. And boy, you talk about a matrix, it is exceedingly complex. This is why when you look at this diagram, I always mention, we are in an interactive consciousness because the planetary sephirotes, or what they call vibrational energies, are in our literal auric field. And the outer celestial influences are interacting with that in a very unique and very specialized way, far beyond what I think any astrologer can do. And karma has to enter into that. That's why I always say, I like this little cartoon. My son gave me this. He says, hey, can we stop and go pee? No, this place has got horrible reviews. Let's go to the next one. But the earth, when you get away from the interaction of egos with people, we tend to find creation itself is very divine. And that's why I always go back to this diagram, everything in the physical realms. And many people will refer to this as the multiverses, literally, where we don't just have this universe, which we haven't even begun to figure out. They claim there are 49 parallel universes and subdimensions in each one. Many quantum physicists have theorized about this, and I also believe some of our extraterrestrial friends are probably worming in and out of those. There's strong evidence to that. And again, the advanced physics, particularly quantum physics, really gets into this. And this is now when we go full circle back to the religions. We hear all these stories in the Bible, or the Garden of Eden story at least, and all the other stories in various different spiritual ancient disciplines, the Vedas particularly, where there was this war in heaven and God got ticked off and cast down the evil spirits. And that's why when you look at reality, it's all atomically, you could say, analyzed. Any physicist will tell you all matter is made up of energy, of molecules and atoms, or atoms and molecules, respectively. And when you look at that, it's positive and negative charges. And every substance on this planet, including the air you're breathing into your lungs right now, is part of that atomic energy. But it's much, much more than that. There's a life force energy that's absolutely stunning when you look at what is going on. My friend Claude Swanson had mentioned that. He passed away. He was a physicist, and he actually wrote some wonderful books on that called The Life Force Energy. Very, very, very interesting stuff when you look into this. So even the hard left brain physicists concede after they've studied it. And, I know I used to study physics. And once you come to the conclusion, we ain't never going to figure it out. What's keeping it all here? Well, there you get into divinity. There you get into souls and spirits and consciousness. It's an interactive consciousness. And, I was on Coast to Coast a while back. I forget when it was. It was about last year or something. And George Norrie said something really smart. I went, wait a minute. He actually said, Jeff, what is astrology? And I thought, what a simple, intelligent question. And what is astrology? What really is it? Well, it's an interactive consciousness upon the soul. This is what many of the great texts, in fact, one of my favorite texts that I mention an awful lot is the Share Hagilgam. I don't know if I got it up here, but the Share Hagilgam talks about the journey of the soul down into this realm. Let me see if I can fire that up. I keep hitting the wrong buttons here. Here we go. The Share Hagilgam is a text. A lot of people have complained they can't get it, but that's it right there. And what is it? Share, or sharar, means gate in Aramaic and Hebrew. And Hagilgam means the cycling of the soul. And in this, it gets into the model of the lower conscious mind, you see, which they call the nefesh, which in psychology absolutely is something that we all build when we're little children going forward. But the lower vibrational emotional conscious mind is not us. It's the interactive consciousness that is really affected by the portals that we call planets and the solar system and the stars, which is much more complex than anybody is ever going to fully figure out. In fact, the more I study astrology, the more I'm in awe of the divinity of the forces in effect on these planets. Some of us just, we go along and life is boring. We just keep working and do whatever we're doing. Other people have massive dynamic change. What's interesting about the Nadi astrology, I've literally seen, I had a gentleman tell me the other day his father was just killed in a very crazy way. A bus went off a bridge, hit him. It was exactly when K2 hit his son in his Vedic astrology in the Nadi progressions. Well, guess what? The sun is your general signification of the father. The moon is the mother. You see, and your siblings can be looked at different ways. And these are gold and ancient secrets in not only the Nadi astrology, but also the medieval Egyptian, Chaldean, and Greek systems. It's an interactive consciousness. Again, I say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. I think this is really, truly the matrix of the soul. And this is another thing, the divide between religions and this esoteric knowledge, which is a shame. This is why the secret societies always brought it together. And, again, one of the better systems, I love this book. It's called Esoteric Teachings. It's a wonderful book that actually talks about this. This was actually written by the Magus of Strobolos. And also, he has a companion volume called Esoteric Practices, which is a technique to sharpen the lower myopic conscious mind into expansion so that it can actually get out of its emotional response patterns and become much more conscious. You see, you look at all the Krishnamurti said it best. He said, be in this world, but not of it, because this world will disappoint you. You will get your butt kicked in this world. I know I have. We all have. And we all will exit this garment known as a body sooner or later. There's no question about that. But what I like is that consciousness is the focus. There's only one thing, no matter how much they do whatever they do, and who is they, all the forces of good and evil, you have your mind. And that's the only thing you're going to take with you. And that's what's interesting, like this Saturn going direct and massive changes in the world. Well, if we're open to it and you react to it more in a conscious way, it can actually be profound because you can't stop it. It's like traffic on the road. You ain't going to stop traffic. Traffic does what traffic does. But it's your reaction to it that keeps you from having an accident or not, right? So, and sometimes it is unavoidable. Like the poor guy got hit by a bus coming off a bridge, smashed through a meridian, and apparently hit his father's car, killed him instantly. So these are weird phenomena. But what's interesting, I've seen, in readings where you see when someone had some tragic accident or some incident, it shows up in the chart in what we call progressions. And, you often wonder, why would God do that, right? I often wonder, hey, why don't you talk to us more, right? Well, been some movies on that, right? One of the books that is the most interesting that I really like, this is written by Rabbi Fatea. And this book is mind-blowing. The first 88 chapters is just kind of biblical references, but chapter 88 is 200 pages of story after story after story after story after story of disincarnate souls trapped in the lower astral worlds possessing other people. If you think that's not real, go read 30 Years Among the Dead, one of my most favorite books to refer to people. And that, again, was written by Dr. Carl Wicklund. Absolutely amazing. This book, if anybody thinks that, reincarnation or that we don't live, another life, I'll tell you what, go read this book. I'm trying to get it up on the screen here. Yeah, for some reason it's not coming up, but maybe if I remove this one here, it's all playing around here with, yeah, here it is right here. So this is 30 Years Among the Dead. But anyhow, that is 30 years of stories of a psychiatrist, a really intelligent psychiatrist who did shock therapy treatment, who would verify people coming through his wife, who was a channel, Oh, my name was so and so. I fell off a roof, and I used to have a roofing company. Now the guy who was working for me is trying to buy it. He said, "Well, you're deceased." And then you go look in a newspaper. Yeah, so and so named that guy was reported dead, falling off a roof. And there's so many examples. I mean, this book will bend your noodle back. So back to astrology. What is all this? Well, again, when you look at astrology, we try and get answers. Well, I mean, why does anybody get a reading, right? It's because we're trying to figure out what the heck is going on with our crazy lives. And we all have our stories, don't we? Every human being has a really interesting story. We're all on a journey of the soul. And this is what the Vedic astrology's premise is. And that is, it's the science of the light of the soul. That's what Jyotisha really is. And I have to say, so is some of the ancient Egyptian, Chaldean, and Greek astrology as well. It was looking into the soul. And it's very interesting how Prashna interrogation, or horary, whichever you want to call it, came up as a tool that many of the ancient astrologers use, almost all of them actually, for almost anything under the sun. And it's interesting, again, today's topic is Saturn going direct, which is going to do on the 27th. What does it mean? Well, again, every year we get all these planets doing what they're doing. Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year. Mars does it about every 2 years. And these have powerful effects on us as well as the world. And it's a big picture that you got to take up to literally 100,000 feet and look down. Actually, more than that. You want to take it outside of the solar system and look down. And that's what astrology allows you to do, is get a picture of the interactions of energies. And it's interacting with each one of us completely different. So interesting stuff. So I'm going to take a look at a few comments here. And some would say, did that happen in Seattle? Sounds familiar. Yeah. I mean, again, you look at Uranus going again, retrograde over the Pleiades. It's just stirring the soul cauldron. That's what I call this place, the soul cauldron. And it really is. And all of us are at different points of evolution in our souls. And what's interesting is you see what's happening all over the world right now. And it's going to get a little bizarre. And it might get good bizarre, it might get bad bizarre for each one of us individually, depending on how it all aspects your chart. And I see this. People who have this Saturn-Neptune conjunction happening on their ascendant or their midheaven or their descendant is going to find, it's going to be personal, career, relationships, or home and family and real estate issues, or whatever else it's doing. If it's making positive aspects, it might be a real spiritual awakening, or growth pattern, but very, very powerful. Again, Saturn, it's really changing our reality. And it truly, truly is. And I think what is so interesting is Saturn and Jupiter just separated from a trine. See, Jupiter went backwards, Saturn's stationing and going direct. So they're separated. And we got a lot of stuff going on here. And, again, you can't ever do this in one podcast. And that's what's so cool about interrogation and electional astrology. You're taking a picture like a birth chart, like a Polaroid snapshot. And you're examining reality in time right there. And that's it. And it's frozen on what you're asking about in an interrogation chart. It's amazing. So a lot of great questions here. As usual, a lot of people have a lot of great questions. I wish I had more time to answer this. So yeah, someone just said, I just found 30 Years Among the Dead on my bookshelf. I'd forgotten I had it. I guess today's a good day to say, oh yeah, you'll love that book. What I love about 30 Years Among the Dead, Dr. Carl Wicklund was a very staunch left brain scientific psychologist or a psychiatrist, I should say. And in order to become a psychiatrist, you got to become a doctor, a physician first. Then you go into psychiatry. So, that's the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist is a doctor who's now completed his, doctorate in that, and they have to go into now the worlds of psychiatrists. I believe it's 4 years after becoming a doctor. So it's quite a process. And he didn't believe in anything spiritual. I think Dr. Wicklund, it's in the book, he graduated from the Chicago School of Medicine somewhere around 1918 or 1916. So it's last century, long time ago. He's the guy who invented shock therapy treatment. He would take a Windham generator, which is very, very high voltage. And he would shock people who had schizophrenia, paranoia, all these delusions, right? And of course, today we medicate everybody, right? And he found they would clear up. And I don't know if he invented shock therapy treatment, but I believe he might have. I don't know the total history. You can look it up on the internet if I'm wrong. But the bottom line is he got a result. Well, what's interesting is he became, I believe, the head of a mental institution. I don't know if it was LA County or whatever. It's in the book in Los Angeles at the birth of Hollywood. And he fell in love with this lady who was a psychic channel. Now, think about that. You got Mr. Left Brain Linear who believes in nothing but science and medicine, right? And he marries a channel. He became attracted to her. Talk about karma and fate. Well, what happened was he did a study to see if she was delusional. So he actually was, has stenographers and everything. The book is so well written. The foreword alone is worth the read. And what happened is someone came into his wife in a channeling session and looked at him and said, "You're the one shocking me with that lightning." And there's a lot of different ones, but that one was what really happened. And he said, "What do you mean?" And the person proceeded to explain an exact situation that they couldn't have known had they not been there. And he says, "Well," he said, "how could you know all this?" He said, "Well, you were shocking me." He says, "You must be possessing my patient, and you must be deceased," right? And then he gets to talking to the guy, and it's all in the book, if I get it wrong. But so many of these would talk about, I was a pharmacist and now nobody listens to me. You'll find not only this book, but The Unquiet Dead by Dr. Edith Fiore, amazing. The Freeing the Captives are just a couple of books I always mention. They're amazing books. I might have the book here. Let me see if I can fish it out of my little thing here. I might have it in here. But Freeing the Captives was another book. Well, the one that I don't have it in the queue here, but anyways, you can look it up. And usually when you jump on Amazon or do a search, those will come up underneath it anyhow. But these doctors have all, in my opinion, proven that these disincarnate souls, these people who exit the garment known as the body, don't die. Their consciousness stays intact. Now you get into astrology and all this stuff about planets, doing whatever they're doing, right? Retrograde, direct, aspecting, all this stuff, yogas, all these things astrologers talk about. What does it really mean to us? Well, it's really an interactive consciousness. And the book, I think, that sheds some of the light most interestingly on that is Minot Yehuda. And the reason why, what he's got in his hand there is something called purifications and rectifications. Now, you might say, what is that? That's not the Bible. This is very advanced spiritual stuff where he would be called in. And by the way, Rabbi Fateh lived in the late, I think, 1800s, and he died in the early 1900s. And he lived in Baghdad, Iraq, And he ended up matriculating over to the Holy Land. And what's interesting is he would be called in when people would get possessed. They'd go into convulsions or whatever, right? And he would be brought in to depossess them, and which we hear about this stuff all the time, right? Clearing. So he would get in contact with the person and he would be able to see their past life. And then some of these people were so screwed up, he said he had to cut the soul, send the bad part back into the soul cauldron called Earth and mix it up in there with the astrology and everything else. And the good portions would be left to move on to other realms, other universes, or maybe up to the divinity. So very interesting stuff here. And this gets way beyond what the religions get into. And what's very interesting about this book is there's one story. I tell this story a lot. I'll tell it again. Amazing story where this guy was very wealthy and he was on his way to his aging parents that he wanted to give them money, right? And of course, I think this is the late 1800s. And of course, back then you didn't buy dishwashers and cars, right? Or whatever, walk-in bathtubs, you bought servants, right? So apparently he was going to go back and help them. So he stopped at an inn and he paid for the bill. And what was so interesting about this story is the old man, the innkeeper who gave him the key, this was his last leg apparently on the journey, said to his son after he gave him the key, he said, "Do you see all that gold in that guy's satchel?" He says, here's the key. You get in there. There's an extra key. You get in there tonight and you get that gold, right? So that's what happened. The innkeeper's son goes in there sneaks in and grabs the bag of gold, right? Almost out the door, and the guy wakes up, and they get in a big fight, and the innkeeper's son had a knife, and he kills him. So here's what's interesting. Let me come back to this here. The deceased person who was, the guy going to his parents, was going to go. He ended up at the a celestial court. It's in the book if you read it. But he ends up in a celestial court, and the angels actually said to him, "Do you forgive this guy?" And he says, "No, I don't forgive him. I want to, I had a good life. I was taking care of my parents." Boom, right back into incarnation, because he wanted him to get just what he got. And isn't that the first knee-jerk reaction we have? Look at all the road rage. I've been hearing people lately getting killed in road rage incidents with Mercury retrograde. Remember I told you this Mercury retrograde would be dangerous. And of course that happens a lot, but it's been happening a lot more from what I've been hearing. Anyways, long story short, the guy ends up back in reincarnation, and he ends up growing up, and in his 30s, he goes back to that inn, and he couldn't remember, because remember, we're blocked. Our consciousness is blocked from remembering these things. And he kills the now old man who was the innkeeper's son when he got killed in the previous life. And he saw that. Vateas saw that. And he actually said, "I see what happened." He says, "I got to release you from this, from the bondage." See, now we get into what the religions talk about. How many people, whether they're alive or dead, "That son of a gun, I remember him." We all do that, right? And it's fun to joke around about sometimes, but I'll tell you what, if you don't release it, you're going to keep repeating it. This is the soul cauldron, and the earth is a grounding rod. And what's interesting about all these planets going direct and retrograde and aspecting and all this stuff, they're portals. They're a matrix portals that's interacting with your consciousness, which is the most important thing, is your consciousness, not the astrology, believe it or not. The astrology is useful to focus your consciousness or to understand when something begins and ends, because astrology is really about timing. It's all about time. I always say God created time so everything wouldn't happen at once. So this is really cool stuff to ponder. And these books, when you read them, you're not going to see astrology in 30 Years Among the Dead. You're not going to see astrology in Rabbi Fatea's book, or even in Daskalos's book, which is, of course, esoteric teachings, esoteric practices. And what you will get, though, is that this reality is temporary. And all of us will exit this garment known as the body. So pretty wild stuff. And that's where you focus, is your consciousness. You use the astrology like the driver uses the road to see what's coming at him. But it's your reaction or your conscious awareness and skill sets that really get you where you're going. So it's just a deeper, broader way of looking at things. So anyways, I got to run. But yeah, a lot of people are giving so many great comments. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. But yeah, that's what they say. Someone's saying here, I like that, the garment known as the body. And that's what they say. The mother prepares a garment in the womb and of course, science is all about genetics and everything, right? Which is very accurate. I'll give them that. It's exceedingly accurate. But the soul is tied into that at first breath. It's really interesting. Here, I'll just take a second and see if I can't share my screen one more time. It's very interesting. Again, you can see the utility of this diagram and why I use it so much. And it's really quite profound, because when you think about it, they say an angel ties us and attaches us to the mother's womb at conception, not at birth, at conception. In fact, if you look into the Egyptian, Chaldean, and some of the old Nadi astrology, what you'll find, let me see if I can zoom in on this thing. Yeah, there we go. So they actually say the period of gestation for the 9 months that the mother has us in the womb, which is approximately that. Some are a little early, some are a little late, right, etc. But when we exit the womb and the umbilical cord is cut and enter the air of the world and breathe it into our lungs, the air is the spirit. Not that just the air is, but that's when the spirit, psyche, and soul is all ignited into the autonomous life that we all experience until that last breath. Try not taking breaths. You won't last too long. You might be able to do it for 60 to 90 seconds, maybe up a couple of minutes, whatever. I don't want to get into that argument, but you got to breathe. And it's so interesting how the breath is synonymous as to the time at which the spirit, psyche, and soul was, attached to the body. And when we exit the garment known as death, right, the body, we will find we're outside of it. And there's so many stories of this. Well, I was outside of my body, or I was looking down, NDEs, OBEs, all this stuff. And people who are deceased that I've actually communicated with, very interesting. They say, well, I was outside of the body. This is so weird. I'm watching everything. See, it's interesting. I've actually, my father passed away last January. I actually had him join me on a motorcycle going down a hill. I could hear him. He's like, wow, this is a cool bike, because he never rode it. And cool stuff. So again, this is, the skeptics will say, yeah, well, how can you prove that? Well, you can't prove that. But I think these books do prove it in overall what they, portray. It's absolutely amazing. And this is a matrix. And I think this is one of many. And what is astrology? Well, astrology is the matrix that interacts in what we call time. Time, a lot of yogis in India, time's an illusion, right? And I always go, well, drop a brick on your foot, pal, and call me on the first of the month, or have a health condition and tell me if it's an illusion. It's not an illusion. It's a very real place, this place. It's a reality machine, and it's divine in a reality machine. And what's interesting is that yet, if we were to change the speed of the earth, if we were to change the celestial phenomena, which is really locked in, it's almost like a standing wave is what they call it in physics. It's locked. It's very fixed. I mean, I know I've talked to different people in astronomy. And you can see it in astrology programs. They're very accurate. These planets will ascend, descend, and culminate to the millisecond. I mean, it's so accurate. It's creepy. And when I see people who have, certain conditions going on in their lives, I always tell the story about there was this one little boy, the parents were being told to medicate them. And I said, well, I can't give you medical advice, but I said, I can tell you this child has a progression that's very severe going on between now and the next 4.5, 5 months. I said, when that gets over, it's going to stop. The dad and the mother both said, well, if that's the case, we'll support him. I said, yeah, support him, nurture him, do what you got to do. By the way, when that got over with, that kid was fine. It totally disappeared. All the phenomena he was experiencing, the psychiatrist says he's delusional and everything, which they probably weren't wrong. He was having delusions, but that was a Neptune-Mars aspect. And all of us could experience that in our lifetimes. It's the twilight zone. And it's so accurate when you look at how these energies line up. And that's what I try and do in readings, is point out, hey, you got this going on, which might be really good. Or you got this going on, which might be really challenging. Well, just like the driver in the car, what do? You react, right? So if it's a clear day and nobody's on the freeway, hit the gas and have some fun, right? But if you're in a traffic and people are interacting and you got people running across the street, slow down, right? Pay attention to your conditions. It's the same thing. This is just common sense when you use it the right way and you get rid of all this airy-fairy sun sign woo-woo crap, and you just look at it. What is it? It's a matrix. It's an interactive timing matrix. Again, I say God created time, so everything wouldn't happen at once. So anyways, a lot of people here. Somebody's talking about Alibaba. That's cool. Yeah, good story. Will JFK really strange grandson on Nadler's seat? I don't know what someone's saying. This guy is really odd. Thanks in advance. Oh, it must be Jerry Nadler. Yeah, Jerry, that guy's tweaked, isn't he? But anyhow, we're all tweaked in one way or another. But I would say, I'm just looking at paging through here. A lot of questions. I don't have time to get into them all, but I wish I did. But see some people saying here the eyes aren't what they're used to be. And, there's so many things that natural remedies can help. And, it's really cool stuff. But anyways, so somebody's saying their butt's really sore from the kicking, and he used the word ass, whoever it was. That's funny. Yeah, we all get a kick, don't we? And it's interesting how you look at the yogas in Vedic astrology. You can actually see some of us are actually surrogate karmic channels. where certain family karmas or relationship karmas are dissipating out on the grounding rod called Earth, or what I call the soul cauldron. Really, really deep stuff. That's why the ancient Vedic astrology is pretty profound in the perspective that it looks at life. It's literally an experience, and one other thing I want to just say here before I go is, I've been doing a lot of fun stuff here with gems. This is a gem I just did. This is a person's guardian angel. Now, isn't that interesting? There, if you look, it's kind of hard to see, but there's 7 letters on here. And what does that mean in plain English? And you'll see these other pendants, the same thing. See, there's 7 letters on there. That's an old one I did. Here's one that I just did. It's really phenomenal. This, you can see, that's actually etched into the castings, and then we enamel it on top of it, so it's more showing. But what this is, there's 7 letters. Those are the 7 inner planets, their exact position, degree, and minute when you were born, drew first breath. And they say an angel literally accompanies us. Now, we don't get to talk to them. Some people do, but most don't. And they say that angel will be there at death and take us away. Isn't that interesting? And, it's really a shame that some of the religions, not all of them, don't give us more of this esoteric information, because it doesn't negate what some of the religions teach. It actually reinforces it, that life is a journey. It really, really is. And, again, there's a lot of truths in certain religions. Again, certain texts, when you get rid of the dogma and all the egos surrounding this stuff that's coming at us, there's a lot of great truths. You look at the Vedas, you look at the Sermon on the Mount, you look at the Shari Teshuvah, the Shari Gilgam, and many texts and many different sects of really profound insights into that. Just like Rabbi Fateh said, the guy didn't forgive him. He wanted to get him back. Well, guess what? He got to come back and get him back. But it also tied him to the reincarnational purposes. Does that sound familiar? Echo. Listen to Sermon on the Mount. Very same things. So very interesting stuff. Free will is what we all got. We all have free will, and you can do anything you want. So it's interesting stuff. I just heard about a guy in road rage. Some guy cut him off, and they got into it. And his wife and son and 2 kids were in the back seat. And he gets out, and the guy gets out. And next thing they know, mom and the kids see dad dead on the floor because of the road rage. So you think about that. Now that guy is going to sit in prison for the rest of his life for manslaughter and murder. And this family doesn't have a dad. See, that's what I mean. It's reaction, consciousness and reaction. And this is exactly what many of the great religions taught. And they did, and they're not wrong. And it's interesting because astrology, now if we looked at his astrology, we'd probably find he had, something lining up that caused that. But again, if time didn't, experience that, we all get to come back, you see, and we get reflections on this. They claim there's a point where you actually can get reflections of the soul and what happened at certain points in incarnation. Really interesting stuff. That's why I love the movie Ghost. Remember that time when Patrick Swayze, the window opened up right after he was killed, and Molly's there holding him, right? And his body, seeing his body. But he decided to stay. And he did, so he could resolve why he was killed and murdered. And of course, save Molly, right? So interesting stuff. It was a great movie. And so many truths to that. And so many people get trapped in the astral worlds. I really like, again, see, I love this scene right
I'm
here.
not supposed to be here! You gotta take all your emotions, all your anger, all your love, all your hate, and push it way down here into the pit of your stomach. And then let it explode like a reactor.
So, it's a movie, but what's so cool is the writing in that was, I think, a lot closer to how it is than we've been told. And when you read these books, 30 Years Among the Dead, Sharia Gilgam, Freeing the Captives, on and on, you get, especially the Magus of Strovolos. That is a book I mention repeatedly, and I'd love to throw this book out of helicopters. And just for those who haven't read it, amazing book. Because what it does is it expands your conscious awareness that everything we're in the doldrums about all the time right here, not that we all are all the time, but when it gets heavy, we got to realize we're just having an experience. You're the driver of the car, you see, and what's coming at you is just an experience and dissipations of karmas. So with that, I got to run. But everybody, thanks. You've given me a lot of great comments. And so, yeah, somebody say, don't forget to support, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Yeah, I never say that stuff. I just do these because it's fun. But anyhow, yeah. But one thing. Here's I want to mention. I did a podcast and the audio was so screwed up, and we figured out why. Mercury retrograde, right? The StreamYard had it connected wrong, so we got it straightened out. Here's what's interesting. The government shut down. Now it's kind of old news, right? But the interrogation said it was going to shut down for a long time originally. And then I cast it again and said, wow, it's likely to open in 3 days. And that was, I think, a Sunday ago when I did that. And interestingly enough, it happened right as Mercury and Mars came together. See? So interesting stuff, how amazing interrogation astrology is. You just can't overuse it. You got to be careful with it. It's got to be really important stuff. So with that, everybody, thanks for joining me. And this was a lot of fun to do. And yeah, a lot of people are making a lot of great questions here, but I wish I had more time to go through them. But I got to get running. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.